going through, as you can tell, some of the wider themes that showed up in a bunch of questions, and then maybe we'll have time for a few individual questions. But one thing that a bunch of people asked about was companion characters. That was a really fun and really cool part in Fallout, and I think folks are curious if you guys are approaching that in a similar way here in Skyrim, or kind of what's going on with that.
We are approaching it in a different way. I would not expect the deep personalities and uniqueness with a low number of companions. We are aiming for a much, much higher number and of companions that you could hire, or they become your friends and they come with you. It's something we're messing with, and we'll probably talk about more later, but the general direction is to make it a bit more dynamic and have more people that you could decide to bring with you. And in that, we sacrifice them having, because we have a larger number, we sacrifice them having a lot of depth or personalities or individual stories. And there still will be some like that, but that's kind of the direction we're headed right now. Sure. We don't know the exact number of NPCs in the world that could become your companion, but we're hoping it's a big number.
Well, and your Radiant story system, I would suspect, lets you do all sorts of interesting stuff with
exactly.
With
actually, we were playing the game a few months back where anybody could become your companion.
Oh yeah.
And I don't think we're going to do that
right.
after playing it. But with the Radiant story and the tools we have right now, we can pretty much do what we want. We just want to find the right balance so it plays nice and the player isn't confused or gets somebody to be their companion and takes them to a dungeon and it was just, that was a worthless experience. Do you know what I mean? So,
yeah. I'm happy we're kind of talking about that, because across both comments here and asking you questions and in other stories, I think there's still people who are curious and are trying to understand a little bit more about what Radiant Story does. Have you come to a sense of, like, is there a short form description of what that does for players in a general sense, why Radiant Story is going to be cool for people?
And the main thing that we want to be careful with Radiant Story is to not oversell it.
Yeah.
It's a tool that we use to make quests. And we started the game by making them all very, very random/dynamic. And you do see the holes in that. It doesn't tell, despite its name, Radiant Story, it doesn't tell a good story. Good stories are still told by good writers who put them together, and we do most of our quest lines that way. But
sure. All
of the quests are still done. Radiant Story is the tool you use to make any quest. And you can make all of the roles in that quest. You can handcraft all those roles, or you can take any part of the quest and conditionalize it. So what it allows us to do is to take parts of a quest or an activity and conditionalize it without having to hand script conditions. One of the examples that we've been using to sort of crystallize it for people is a common quest we would do in a game is you come to town and there's a guy who has a child that's been kidnapped, and they're in a dungeon nearby. Well, with Radiant Story, what we can do is just write that as a quest template, fill out the roles saying it's a guy in town who likes you, who has a child, and then the role for the location is a dungeon that fits this. And we can pick a dungeon that you haven't been to for some reason that's nearby. We don't know why you haven't been to it, but you haven't been there. So you walk into town, and the game just says, oh, there's a guy in town who likes you. We're going to kidnap his kid who you might have met and put him in this dungeon for some reason you didn't go to, and that dungeon happens to be a higher level dungeon, and so we think you could use a challenge right now, and the reward is going to be this other thing that your character can use. Doing that before is impossible, but we have that opportunity right now, and so we tend to be using it. The more dynamic quests tend to be like little favor things that people ask you to do, not full-blown quests. But if you were to play a quest, it's very hard for you to tell. It's going to seem very handwritten, and you'd really have to compare notes with your friend to figure out the parts that particular quest decided to make dynamic. Because some quests have no dynamic elements, and some quests have more. I hope that makes sense.
Yeah.
And so we're still finding new things we can do with it every day. It's just a matter of getting that on the screen where the player is having a good experience and not seeing through the whole, like, oh, this is all just the same random thing over and over again, which we want to avoid.
Right. Well, I mean, the takeaway point for me really was that, like, your main story and, like, the plot that you guys are crafting is still done by hand.
Absolutely.
This is stuff that goes beyond that to make, you know, random events feel more personal to your character.
Right. Or when we're going to send you to do something, we can tailor that a bit to the things you've done.
Yeah, yeah.
Another question that was asked dozens, maybe even hundreds of times is, will factions be returning? Like, a lot of the quests in Oblivion were handled through the different factions, like the Dark, you know, or Fallout and the Dark Brotherhood kind of stuff. Will we see stuff like that in this game?
Yes, absolutely. We're doing factions, and that's definitely something we're going to be talking about later. Not because we don't know, which is something that we've decided to, like, well, that's a good thing to save till later because we're talking about so much other stuff right now.
Yeah, totally. But I mean, I think there were a lot of people who were just curious if they're in, so they'll be
Definitely,
reassured
yeah.
that
different than what we've done before.
Oh, yeah?
And what they are.
Okay.
But we definitely are having them.
Are there some that are returning, or is it's all new ones?
There are some that are returning, yes.
Okay. Coolness. You know, there are a bunch of people who are doubting you about this release date thing, this whole 11/11/11. Are you? How committed are you to this number here? You feel pretty good about it right now?
We definitely do, yeah. Yeah, I mean, if you know us, we actually tend not to announce release dates until later in the process.
Yeah.
You know, when we announced Fallout's, I think it was the summer, maybe E3 time, and we made that date.
Mm-hmm.
So we're very confident about it. There's still a lot to do in the game, and but we wouldn't have announced it if we weren't really confident.
I think people are just honestly are just so excited about it. They're like, they want to be able to quite literally mark their calendar of, like, the day they're going to the game store. So
yeah, and it's a great date. You can't forget that.
It is pretty great.
It's great.
Yeah.
This is kind of a funny question, but it was asked many times over, and it's kind of interesting too. Why do characters always start in a prison?
Or as a prisoner.
Or as a prisoner, yeah.
Well, it started that way in Arena, and we did it again in Morrowind, then Oblivion. There's a couple reasons for it. One, the first one is it started to become a tradition. Number two, we like this idea that there's a little bit of conflict in the beginning with you being a prisoner, and we never say why. So you immediately, when you start the game, in your head, tell a story of why you're in prison to yourself. And so I kind of like that about it. You know, if you think you're some good guy character, you're like, well, obviously they have the wrong person. I shouldn't be here, and I'm going to do something about it. So that's why it's part tradition and part it lets you in your head tell a quick little story for yourself.
Sure. That's cool. Well, I want to hop into a couple of individual questions that I thought were interesting out of the many that I looked through that weren't touched on in some of those more general topics that we just kind of went over. One of the early questions that showed up on I think the first page of our comments was from a guy named Warbuff, and he or she asked about how much they said that they really loved Fallout 3, but they weren't like big Morrowind or Oblivion guys. And in this guy's case, wanted to know what aspects of Skyrim you think are going to appeal to a gamer like him. If there are things you're drawing out from Fallout and from kind of that modern day sensibility that should have him be excited about Skyrim.
That's a good question. I mean, if you really, really don't like Oblivion, I'm not sure. I want to swing it to, like, sell the person, but if you really don't like Oblivion, I don't know that this is suddenly going to switch you over. But I would probably say, I'm kind of thinking here, one of the things that Fallout 3 does well is there's a certain tone to the world, there's a certain uniqueness to it, it has style. Oblivion, for what it is, can be very kind of classic, traditional fantasy. There's not a lot of unique style to the world,
Okay.
or what, you know what I mean?
Mm-hmm.
Whereas Skyrim, I definitely think, has a unique style. We got better at that, and we push it. Like, what is the culture of these people? So it has its own flavor. It's definitely grittier. It's lower tech. The world's lived in. The ruins feel ancient and thousands of years old. And so we're also careful in Skyrim about the various ages of when was this built? This is this old. This is this old. Where Oblivion can run everything looks like it was built in the same. Every building in this town was built on the same day, like pre-planned amusement park. So I do think there's a more unique and better flavor to the province of Skyrim and the game Skyrim than we had in Oblivion and Cyrodiil.
Got it. We actually had another reader who inadvertently, I think, kind of dovetails with that question. I'm sure this guy's somebody who's played Fallout, because he asked if Skyrim's going to have multiple endings, and if like your choices are going to affect those. That was a big part of kind of the Fallout experience. Is that something you guys are interested in exploring in Skyrim?
I mean, I don't really want to answer the ending of the game question.
Yeah, sure.
So I'm going to pass on that question.
Fair enough.
It ends with a werewolf holding a spear riding a dragon.
Right.
I think we should just assume
And
that that's probably what it's going to be.
Spend money for this DLC.
We seriously have like a phone book here of questions.
Yeah, we're just looking through.
Paging through it.
Another thing that showed up a couple times, I'm looking at a particular question from a guy who calls himself Bioshocker. And he